All right,
Good
so they
morning,
won't be able to.
everybody. Welcome to the Drazen Rubin Law Estate Planning for Business Owners Seminar. Here you will learn ways to keep your business going forever and staying out of probate, ways to make your business passable to your inheritance. In Now we're going to start with Franklin.
Hi, my name is Franklin Drazen. I'll be presenting today with Stephen Rubin, my partner, and our firm is Drazen Rubin Law. It's a very creative name. We're going to be talking about estate planning for business owners, and we're going to break it into two sections. The first one is basic estate planning as it applies to business owners, and the second one deals more specifically with transferring the business and exit strategies. So if you can advance next, Stephen. Okay. Well, it's a full-time commitment running a business. You all know that. No one's got to tell you that. But some of you may have been thinking about, am I going to have to stay in this business forever, or how am I going to preserve some value for the family and pay for my retirement? So, and some of you just want to make it as easy as possible at your passing for your family member to make certain that the business continues and things go as smoothly as possible, whether you're selling during your lifetime and running off into the sunset, or whether or not you're going to be waiting to pass things at your death. We always like to say that not everything should be tax driven, and especially with estate taxes. But the way things work today, for about the last 10 years, they've significantly increased the exemption before you have to worry about estate taxes, and it's now over $11 million for an individual and over $22 million for a married couple. So that should eliminate the estate tax planning concerns for most people in the audience. If it doesn't, then you need to pay more attention. There's some additional planning. We're not going to be able to speak much to that today. For those people who have attended our seminar today, we offer a complimentary consultation so we can find out a little bit more about your situation and make some suggestions or tell you if your planning is adequate to do what you'd like to do. So you can, as you say, you can transfer your business to the family, or you can deal with something about protecting it from creditors. So we're going to talk now about the important documents that are necessary for planning, and everybody needs to have these documents, and especially business owners, because at a time when you can't do your own decision making, you need someone to be able to continue the operation of the business and to make decisions regarding your holdings in the business. Next slide, Stephen. So I want to just go over the list briefly, and then we'll go over these things in a little bit more detail. For just about everyone's situation, you're going to need a durable power of attorney to authorize someone to act as your agent, and now and at a point in time when you can't make decisions for yourself. We're also going to need a living trust with a pour-over will. We'll go over that, but a living trust helps manage your assets during your lifetime, provides management after your death. And a pour-over will allows us to get any assets that might not have been put into your trust during your lifetime into your trust. Now, some people will choose to use a traditional last will and testament, although this generally doesn't work quite as well for business owners because of the involvement in by the probate court in the actual operations and management of the business. Uh, we also want people to have a HIPAA medical information release. This allows your loved one or anyone else that you authorize to be able to get information and share information and get medical records and talk to any medical provider you have or insurance company. It's very common these days for insurance companies to try to deny talking to people that may need to act on your behalf, and they'll claim that there are these privacy rules in the HIPAA statute that prevent them from doing that without a signed release. A living will expresses your interest in terminating your life and not having it prolonged by artificial means. And a designation of a conservator is sometimes a default instrument that if you haven't done sufficient planning to deal with a time when you're incapacitated and either your finances or your personal well-being is endangered because of it, and you haven't made the other provisions, then you can go to the probate court and they'll appoint a conservator of the estate to manage your finances and a conservator of the person to make your care and wellness decisions. Next slide. Thank you. So the living will expresses your wishes regarding care at the end of your life. This document, and so if you don't want things to be, the Supreme Court has ruled that you don't have to have your life artificially prolonged if by clear and convincing evidence you've made your wishes known. The state legislature said that by doing that, they have a form that will be accepted by medical institutions and medical providers that it authorizes them to let you pass, and this only lets you pass if you're at the very end of your life from a terminal illness, or you're in a permanent coma and you're not expected to regain consciousness. The second part of this document that's equally important is to name what we call a healthcare representative, and they make medical care decisions for you at a time when you're not able to give informed consent. Now, the important thing to note is this is not just at your end of life, but it starts before that, even if you're in surgery and can't make a decision, or you've been in a car accident or something like that, and you expect it to recover, but decisions still have to be made. The person you've named as your healthcare representative will make those decisions. And it also allows the doctors to know which one of your family members they're supposed to listen to and take instructions from. Next slide. So the HIPAA medical information, as I mentioned earlier, allows for the release of your health information. There's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which is the HIPAA is an acronym for that. And so what we want you to do is authorize people that they can talk to. The people named on your HIPAA are not necessarily decision makers. So let's say you have a brother that you want to be able to talk to the doctor, but you don't want to make any decisions for you. You could include him. You could have as many people as you want to serve on this document and or receive the information. And we like to have this signed, and we like to do it in multiple copies. And the reason for that is that anyone you want to talk to, if someone insists on seeing an original signature on this and some other documents, we want the person to be able to have something that they have in their possession that they can bring and present to be heard. The other reason why we like to have separate documents is that in today's medicine, a lot of times people will give authorization for their primary care physician as to who they can talk to. But as you progress down the medical system, as we age, we tend to collect doctors the way we used to collect baseball cards when we were kids. It seems like every week you'd get another 5 of them in a pack. So this way, no matter who's treating you, your loved ones will be able to let them know that they received this authorization and demonstrate that. Next. Now, a conservatorship is a proceeding in the probate court, and in that, it's to supervise the financial and personal affairs of a person that's incapable of doing so. We name the individual that you want to serve on this designation form. You can name one person to do the personal well-being decisions and another one to handle your finances if you like, or the same person can do both. This can be an adversarial proceeding, and so because they want to safeguard your rights to your independence. All right. So so I want you to be aware that there can be some significant things about this. And if you think you want someone that knows your business to be conservator of your estate, you could name them on this document, or you could have a loved one do it and perhaps have someone else in your organization get authorized to make the decisions while you can't. Next slide. A last will and testament is a writing which is executed with your signature, 2 witnesses' signature, and an affidavit is also signed by the witnesses saying that you were competent and were doing this as your free will and weren't being forced or under duress. It appoints an executor to be in charge. Now, it's only effective after it's admitted into probate court, and this can take 30, 60 days or more. And during that time, no one is authorized to act for your estate. So you're kind of in limbo this whole period of time. Another thing is that your last will and testament is only effective to direct where property that has to go through probate is involved. So it's very common for someone to say exactly what they want to happen, how they want the assets to be distributed and divided, and then their beneficiary designations on documents will supersede what the will says for retirement accounts or IRA accounts. And so when we're doing this planning, the idea is to have a good understanding of what you want to happen and to make certain that you have the documents needed to support that and that your assets are held and titled in an appropriate way to make certain that your plan is effectuated. It can take several years to go through a probate proceeding, particularly when there's a business involved. Also, a number of things will have to be approved by the probate court. There'll be extra attorney's fees and hearings. And if you're stalled because you're trying to get probate court approval, the business can end up being paralyzed, particularly if there's some kind of disagreement between your estate and other interested parties. All right, we're going to start talking about doing a revocable living trust. As I said earlier, this is a written agreement where a grantor who contributes property to a trust sets down a set of instructions and appoints a trustee who would manages the property that's been transferred to the trust, and only the property that's been transferred to the trust, and they are obligated to follow the instructions that are contained in the trust document. Typically, you would start out as being the business owner, excuse me, as being the trustee of your trust, so that you would maintain management. If you have a business, typically your business assets would be transferred into the trust. One of the primary characteristics that makes this living trust so attractive for business owners is that there's no probate court involvement in the business when it's in the living trust, because assets that are in the living trust are not probate assets and aren't tied up in that proceeding. So not only do we get freedom from the probate court, but we also save expenses and delays. And this can be used effectively for tax planning, specifically for planning for married couples. As I said, the thresholds are so high, this is less of a concern today. Now, trusts, I want to just define them. They can be living or testamentary. Living means that it was created and operating during your lifetime. Sometimes we refer to that as inter vivos, meaning during life in Latin, or it can be testamentary, which means it's taking effect upon your death. Revocable means that the grantor can terminate the trust and take the property out at any time and amend it and have control over the assets that are in the trust. Irrevocable means that it can't be changed by the grantor and it has to end of its own terms. I'm often asked whether or not someone with a, why would someone want a revocable trust versus an irrevocable trust? And the easiest way to think of that is if you had a trust that you can change and control whenever you wanted and terminate and take the property out, or one that you couldn't do those things, which one would you want? Well, everything else being equal, you'd want the one that you could revoke or change at any time. So therefore, we use the revocable trust or the living trust for our basic planning, and we use our revocable trust whenever the living trust won't do what we want it to do. Those reasons are sometimes special, involve taxation or asset protection. If your assets are in a living trust, your creditors get access to it because you can take the assets out anytime you want and you have control over them. So once again, if it's in the trust, there's no loss of control. It's basically transparent. It's like an alter ego of yours. When you can't be the trustee anymore, a person that you designate as your successor can step in and exercise the rights associated with the assets that are in the trust. We want to make certain that you get your appropriate assets in the trust. We call that funding. A common mistake of people, business owners with living trusts, is they create LLCs, but they never transfer the interest in the LLC to their living trust. And as a result, when they die, that business, instead of being part of the trust, becomes a probate asset subject to the supervision and the interference of the probate court. So if you have a living trust already and you'd want to go and make certain that those assets have been transferred into the living trust to keep them out of probate if that's what needs to happen. Next slide. And now I'm going to turn it over to Stephen Rubin, who's going to go through the special issues for business owners.
So business owners always have special considerations when doing their planning, when figuring out how they want to transfer assets. And really the start for a business owner and planning should be figuring out what our goal is, because all of those things are going to lead towards how we might transfer the business, the methodologies used, or the tax savings. Common issues that occur for business transfers tend to be death. The business will pass to someone when we pass away, whether it's through a sale, ideally, or to a family member. It might pass to somebody else, unless the business is one in which there's no way somebody else is ever going to run it, because we are that business. And sometimes that's during our lifetime. It could be to a sale to a non-family member, or it could be a sale through an estate to an individual who's going to buy the business. A lot of people will gift their businesses. I've had so many clients where the kids are working at the business, and now we're slowly giving them shares in an LLC or shares of the business, and they're going to take it over a period of years, or we might liquidate it. We might sell the book of business, the assets that it holds, to somebody else who can work in that industry and can manage those files. And depending on the business, it might be a business that requires special licensing in order for other people to do it. So the individuals who can buy it is a very small audience. So when we're looking at these transfers, we always want to be figuring out what's our goal, what's the industry we're in, and how do we think it's going to happen. When we're dealing with family members, there's, everyone always says to me, oh, it's discounted to a family member, or maybe I don't think my family can run it. But really got to figure out, if they're going to be doing this business, what is it going to look like? The heirs are going to need some income, whether for owning the business, whether it's a passive ownership, then they might not get the cash. If someone else is actually running the day-to-day, if we have a day-to-day manager of the business, somebody else, because they just don't know the industry, there may not be any actual income to them as owners. There can be friction between the working and non-working owners if you have multiple children buying the business or inheriting the business. It's not an uncommon situation where one child manages the day-to-day, the other kids also want equal shares because they're owners, but they don't do anything. And what if there's no ready market? Certain industries, certain businesses, we have to market to the right audience. Again, licensing or limited buyers. If you own a golf course, there's not everyone in the world wants to buy a golf course. So it's got to be narrowed down to who the potential buyers are, and that might delay the inheritance, which could mean expenses for the beneficiaries on passing away with dealing with this. And then, maybe there's estate taxes. Now, as Franklin said, how worried are we about estate taxes? It varies a lot depending on the size of the industry and the business we're in, but it should always be a consideration of paying those taxes. And what about during your lifetime? There should always be some sort of liquidity or exit plan for a business owner. The business is often one of the largest assets in our estates. How can we turn that into cash? Can it actually be sold? Is there another person who wants to take it over, who's going to take it over and is capable of doing it? Become really big issues within a business structure. A lot of people just aren't ready to take over the business or don't have an interest in it. So that's always a big factor. And valuing it. How are we going to structure the sale? How are we going to value what the business is worth to actually sell it? That becomes a really big factor for a lot of people. Sometimes there's what's called goodwill. So it's our reputations in the community. That's goodwill. How do we value that? Do we stay on for a period of time after the sale to keep that goodwill going, to ensure that it passes to the new owner? And what type of entity is it going to be? A lot of people do LLCs, but is LLC appropriate? Should it be an S corp, depending on the type of industry that we're in? Should it be a partnership agreement? There's all different types depending on who's buying it. So these are things that have to be figured out when we're handling the structure of a business sale, whether it's through an estate or to be sold to somebody else. We always have to be looking at it from what our options are. And then we have to figure out how we're going to handle management. And sometimes it's, stock passing to family members, whether it's through an estate or through a gift or through any other transaction, that are just not qualified to run the business. They're not ready. They're not appropriate for running that industry. If financial institutions may not like it if the person who's actually made it successful isn't in charge anymore. So you could have a harder time getting a line of credit on the business, or if there's a mortgage or other loans, they may not be willing to refinance or transfer depending on what the business holds. You could end up in situations where, there's not everyone wants to be involved in the business and they've inherited it. And the heirs that may not be involved all of a sudden might want to be. You pass away and you have some family member who all of a sudden says, hey, I want to run that business. I think I can do it. They've never worked in the industry. They have no knowledge of it, but now they're taking over. And these are all considerations. These aren't solutions. These are things that people have to think about before we can structure a plan. Because without knowing the answers to some of these questions, like who might it be? Are we going to have a succession plan where, we're going to have an employee take over, or is it a family member? Is it going to be through our estate? Do we plan to sell it? Do we have kind of a plan for both circumstances? And I always think we should have both plans personally, right? Because if you're, getting older, who says you want to continue running the business on a day-to-day basis versus maybe having a plan to say, you know what? I think at some point I'm going to retire. And if I'm going to retire, I should start having my exit plan now. Frank and I were having this conversation the other day about a software program. I never like to buy us a new software program unless I have an entry plan and an exit plan. Well, it's the same thing with a business. You should always have an exit plan, because how are we going to get out of this if we don't like the situation? How are we going to ever retire if we want to retire? What are our goals? So we always should be looking at it from that point. And we have to figure out, are we going to be able to, who's our key employees in our business? Because there's always that key employee, that one person that you really just don't want to lose or can't afford to lose in an industry versus your general workforce. And that might be the person that you want to start training to run your business so that if you got sick, there's somebody who can actually manage the day-to-day. That's a big part of it is who can actually take over if we're not here for a day, or if we got sick and couldn't manage it for a month. There should be someone who's ready to take over. And then it's looking at how you retain and encourage and motivate your employees to want to stay in your industry. If you have a good employee, and there's two costs with employees. You always have their salary, but you also have the factor of if you have to replace an employee, how much does that cost you? How much does it cost you to train somebody new? How much time investment are you going to have in that person? How much time is it, what is your time worth when you're training the new person? That becomes a big factor, and you also lose institutional memory. It doesn't mean you're not going to lose people, you're going to, but you try and do things to keep the good people on your side so that they're there with you for the long haul. And you can look at things which as employees ownership plans or specialized retirement plans, 401ks, profit sharing plans. There's all sorts of options for the key employees to try and keep them around long term that you can set it up. And you can make your plans with vesting schedules and things that encourage them to stay longer. So having these things structured as a business owner makes some of the other planning easier. And we have to worry about external interference with a business, especially if you pass away. If someone passes away, if we need court permission and oversight, it's going to cause delays. If there's fights with spouses or children, it's going to cause issues. So having that key employee who knows how to handle the day-to-day that we can empower to run the business might avoid a lot of these things with the external issues, because they can explain to the court, this is how we run on a daily basis. This is what we need to do to keep this business going. So their jobs are secure. They're able to continue their roles. So we want to make sure we really keep those key employees as we do a good plan. And that's part of the planning sometimes is maybe they take a share. Maybe they become part owners in the business over the long term. Maybe that the key employee is the one who buys it rather than it going to a family member. Those are all part of the goals that we have to figure out with these plans. Because there's a lot of common issues. And common issues is basically, I can't think of a single plan where some of these things don't come up, whether it's incapacity of an owner, issues amongst family members, figuring out how to value the business. That's one of the biggest fights you're ever going to have. And everyone overvalues their business. All of us. We all think it's worth more. It's kind of like real estate. Every time someone comes in, oh, my house is worth, 4 times what it's actually worth. My house is $1 million home. It probably isn't in most cases, but everyone thinks everything is worth more than it is. Same with our cars. Well, we do the same thing with business, right? We all think our businesses are worth more than they really are because we've put so much energy and effort into it. So when we have to deal with valuation issues, there's different formulas, there's different companies that can do valuations, there's different ways to appraise them. And that's a really big part, issue that has to come up. And it's going to continue to come up because it's just who we are. And we're going to then argue with the appraiser. You're going to get a business valuation in, and then you're going to say to the guy, no, it's worth more. But it always comes up. And then there's the issue of control. You wouldn't be a business owner unless you wanted to be in charge. You have to be willing to run the day-to-day. All business owners generally want to be in charge. They want to make sure that things are done their way. Well, that becomes an issue when we're starting a succession plan. Who's going to run the day-to-day as we start transferring shares of ownership, as we start working our way down through the line? Who's in charge? And what if there's issues on ownership? If you get to the point where it's 50-50, how do we make decisions? So we have to make sure that's built into every plan. How are we going to structure those decision-making issues? If there's a passive owner versus an active owner, how are we going to structure those decision-making? Is the passive owner who's never been to the business once going to have the same exact vote as the person who's there every day? Or is the person who's there every day kind of blinded by the fact that they're there every day? So we always want to be looking at that when we're dealing with these plans. And that's why today a lot of this is just more general of these are things we have to consider. It's not the answers. We never want to give the answer because the answer is going to be different for every single person who watches this. The answer for each of your business is different because what makes you, what makes your goals yours differs. So we have to look at each situation individually. And, there's a big reason why statistically most businesses fail after the first generation. And it's because of these failures. It's the failure to have a plan, the failure to deal with succession planning, estate planning, and who's going to run the day-to-day and who's going to be the owner when we're gone. So we really want to work on having a plan. And the first step to that is sitting down and figuring out what our goal is. Who do we think is going to want to run the business? It's kind of what I call a vision meeting. We kind of figure out who might actually inherit it, who might buy it, who do we want to run it, and then we can start working on structure. Because there's a lot of basic transfer options, and most of these you'll have heard of, you'll experience. But really, what we're thinking about is potentially selling it to a third party. Is it going to be worth it? Is it a business that can even be sold to a third party? Again, we are our own businesses, so sometimes the value is our name, not necessarily in anything else. So is that third party going to be able to pay cash and get it? In theory, there's a benefit there, right? We get the cash, but what's our business actually worth? That's going to be the challenge there. Now, another benefit of that is once we do that, we have no more obligations on the business. We don't have to deal with the debt. We don't have any obligations to run the business. It's just a simple financial transaction. We avoid fights amongst our family members who think they could run the business and may or may not be able to. And it's generally one of the faster ways of closing out a sale of a business. But it means we have to really deal with pricing. We have to look at the current process, maximize the revenues to maximize the value of the business, and we have to have a business that third parties want to buy. Want to buy is key. I've had clients with businesses that nobody wants to buy. They just have no real value. And part of the reason for that is if you own a landscape business, for example, the value of the business is the clients. The thing is that you sell the client list, but the clients aren't required to stay with the new landscaper. They're allowed to hire another one. So the value decreases. So you have to factor that in when figuring out what is the business worth. It's not necessarily always going to be tied to revenues. It has to be tied to the reality of the situation. And dealing with family members is another really common situation with businesses. We want an heir to take it over. We want a child to take it over. But there's friction. You have the working owners. You have the non-working owners if you have multiple kids. Very rarely does everyone want to work in the business. There may not be a ready market to sell to them. They may not have the cash to actually buy you out of the business if something were to happen where you couldn't handle it on a day-to-day basis. So it might actually have to go through your estate, and then might have to pay some sort of estate taxes if there are any, transfer taxes, any of the other things that may come up. And we also have to then deal with court approval. So we want to factor that in. Now that's where a trust can be really useful, because a trust can help us avoid some of those things. The idea of transferring it to a kid or a family member is obvious. It allows the family legacy to continue. We worked hard to set up our business. Maybe we are the second generation and we want the third generation to take over. We can, gift the business to the kids over a period of years using our lifetime exclusion amounts. And basically that's $15,000 a year, or if we're married, up to $30,000 if the spouse is willing to sign the tax return. But then you have to be careful on evaluating the business, because if you discount the gift, that could be an issue too. So we always want to figure out, what are we doing with this business? How are we going to make the transfer, and who's getting it? And you're going to hear me repeat that a lot, because it's really what we have to worry about. You can do family partnerships. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but it is an option to do like a family business entity to slowly transfer the shares, or using a trust, what we call an IDGIT. It's an intentionally defective grantor trust that's designed to take ownership of the shares in the partnership and slowly move control to somebody else. So we have a lot of options with that control if we were to set up a family limited partnership agreement. We can transfer it directly to a trust, where the trust takes ownership of it and you gift some or all of the stock in a business, or the shares if it's an LLC, into the trust agreement. And you might still be the operator of the business. So the business can have an operating agreement that says on the day-to-day level, you operate it, you are in charge of it, but the ownership has shifted to a trust. And it gives us a little more protection of creditors of the kids and slowly moves it out of your name, but also gives us the power to handle a transfer if something happens during your lifetime, where the trust has authority to sell the business to a third party. The trust has authority to run the business. The trust can keep the key employees. So there's some flexibility with that structure. And then we can look at, do we want to actually transfer it to an employee? Why? Well, one is that it's a really good way to incentivize and reward the employees that have been with you for the long haul. The ones who actually help you run the day-to-day of the business. It can be a little more flexible than doing it to a third party. And it allows you to remain involved in the business for the longer time period, because it can be done over a period of years versus one big sale. Now, in some cases, they might need financing, whether it's from a bank, whether they need to get a loan from a family member. They're likely going to need some sort of cash to pay you. Or it could be based off the business's income. Instead of them taking full amounts of their income, they use it to buy out shares every year. So they pay you for the business over a period of time. And you can continue to serve the business, might even become an employee technically of the business over the long haul, and still transfer your shares. ESOP, or employee stock ownership plans, are another option for transferring a business. Again, this is an option. You sell your company basically to the stock plan, they value it, and then each of your employees gets an incentive program to get them a certain number of shares. And over a period of time, the cash flow is basically pays off the note for the stock plan, and the stockholders become the full owner of the business, and you can sell your stock. And we have to consider incapacity planning in all of this. A lot of these things are about the sale of the business if we pass away, or the sale of the business during our life. What happens if we get sick? How many of us have a real plan if we got sick tomorrow? If we can't manage the business, who's going to manage it for us? Anyone have that plan? Because most of us don't. And that's the reality, is very few people actually have that plan set aside. So we have to come up with that. And that's what estate planning for business owners really is about too, is having that plan. Who can sign the checks tomorrow if I can't? Who's going to be able to call the clients? Who's going to be able to come in and unlock the door if we needed to? Whatever it's going to be, there's got to be those situations. Or what if I just want to go on a long trip? What if I decide I've had enough and I want to take a month trip to Cancun? Who's going to be able to at least pay the bills at that point? I'm not incapacitated from a legal standpoint, but I'm not physically capable of running the business because I'm not here. So we want to have a plan for that. In estate planning and business planning, or kind of go into those things. We want to make sure we have those plans. We want to make sure because it's crucial to deal with those things and make sure we kind of handle it up front. And then we have to look at estate tax strategies. No one likes taxes, including me. But it's something we at least have to discuss or just keep on our radar. And that's why we want to look at pre-planning for businesses. Because while we have these different techniques, we don't want to use them in isolation. Each one has their own place and they work for different businesses differently. So we want to really figure out, what are we trying to accomplish? And we want to have a strategic plan for this. How we're going to handle these items rather than just running around like chickens with our heads cut off. It's far better to have a plan than it is to just kind of guess what you want to do. We want to have a defined set of goals. What are we trying to accomplish? What are we going to accomplish by having this? Who do we want to do it? And have our team available to work with us on it. And we want to have a plan that works. We want to have a plan that kind of allows us to go through the different options, whether it's, the tax law has changed or something else. We want a plan that just works and is flexible enough for us to make changes. And part of that is we have a program for our clients called Life Cycles to help them work their way through it. So when we really look at this, this wasn't an answer session. And I say that a lot because people always say to me, so I need a trust. No, what you need is a plan. The document will be a part of the plan. But the important takeaway today is really, there has to be a plan. We have to start thinking about who's going to run the business, who's going to help us if we get sick on a day-to-day basis. If we're not able to manage the business, who's going to be able to take over the day-to-day? If we're going to sell the business, how are we going to do so? And who might our potential buyers be? And how do we value it? The key for this is planning. And that's really what we want to do. So it's not that I need something, because we don't know what you need yet. Really, you have to tell us what your goal is. And then with the goal, we can start figuring out the best route to get there. And that's what the key takeaway for today is. You have to be prepared. As a business owner, we have obligations to ourselves. We have an obligation to the business. We have obligations to our staff. So we have to figure out where do we want to go with this business in the long run? Where do we want to go if we can't manage the day-to-day? How are we going to handle it? What happens if we're sick? What happens if we're healthy and just decide to retire or go away? We want to make sure everything is coordinated, that it's been structured and worked and designed in a way that just really works together, so that we're not in a situation of just guessing or running. That's really the key. The key here is just kind of to have that discussion with ourselves and then with our partners, if we have them, to figure out what we want to accomplish. Once we figure out our goals and figure out our plan, we have to start sitting down with the people and working through it. And it's not just, hey, let's spend 5 minutes together. It's let's come up with a plan. Let's come up with our options and then figure out which one really works for us. That's the goal today, is, just starting to plan. We plan for almost everything else we do in life. We plan to start the business. You have a marketing plan. You have a plan for your day-to-day. If you're buying product, you're planning for that. But why haven't we planned for what else is going to happen to us? So today's key takeaway, have a plan. So with that, I thank everyone for coming. If there's any questions, the Q&A box is open.
Okay, well, thank you guys. That was a very informative seminar, and I appreciate everything that's going on here. And I hope that anybody who has a question feels free to put it into the chat or into the Q&A box. That would be fantastic. Trying to find the button. No. Okay, so thank you, everybody. And if anybody doesn't have any questions, feel free to reach out to Franklin and Stephen right there on Cherry Street, across the street from ShopRite. and they're happy to help you plan out your future.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Gladys.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I know Gladys. Okay. Yeah, I look forward to doing this again sometime.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you very much. Everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you for having us.